Thank you for joining us. We've got Courtney Danbrook with Danbrook, Adams, and Raymond. Myself, John Sluice, and Jeff Wood with Intest CPA. We're going to be talking about wills, estates, and trusts. Please join us as we work through all of those. We are seeing more and more calls and discussions and items come up related to estates and wills and generation wealth transfers, partly because I think that we're seeing people have a heightened awareness of the mortality rate that's out there because of COVID, because of everything that's going on. We're seeing a little bit on discussions with the elections that are out there on transitional items, on do we move things now versus next year. So we certainly see it from a tax planning point of view, but we brought Courtney in here to talk through from her viewpoint on what she's seen on just the everyday of items that relate to the estates and wills and what does it look like. And so with that, Courtney, are you seeing an increase on these requests for this? What are you seeing?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think just as you said, with what's going on, there's certainly a heightened awareness of our own mortality, and generally a recognition of just how fragile life is, and that sudden aha moment to think, gosh, have I planned? Have I done anything yet? And so certainly people are really thinking about it, and even clients that were struggling with decisions to be made previously have all of a sudden, it's taken them a year to do their planning, and suddenly those decisions which were hard before are a little bit easier, and we're really pushing to get the planning done.
Good. So. And actually getting it done. I think
exactly.
you hit on a really key point where we might have been talking about it for 2 or 3 years, or we've been thinking and strategizing, well, maybe this or maybe this, and we'll go into those details, but in our last video we talked about it. Now is the time. There is definitely a reason to feel that now is the time to actually make it from just a planning into actually doing.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the context of this video that we're actually talking about is, okay, we're doing. So what is that first step that someone does when they recognize that they do have this mortality rate, that this is out there? What do they do? What does that look like? What does that feel like? What's there?
Yeah, and we talked a little bit before about different types of clients and where people are at in the planning process. And you've got a lot of people who have just out of fear or for other reasons just put it off and not done it. And so you have those that don't have any plan in place. And then you also have another set of clients who have done planning, but the typical, they've done it, they put it away in the drawer, and they haven't looked at it in years and years and years. And meanwhile, life continues to change around that plan, and obviously things need to be updated. So first steps are always, if you've got an existing plan, let's take a look at it, think about what has changed from tax law perspective, other law perspective, and or just in familial situations, what has changed and how that changes how the document was written and maybe what needs to be done there. And from the other perspective, if you have somebody without a plan at all, they may need a little bit more of an education piece too, to understand, what does that planning entail? What do I need? How does it suit me in my specific situation?
Courtney, I imagine it's difficult for some people just to get started with the planning process. What's that barrier? Why do folks have trouble just getting started?
I actually think number one is that fear of mortality. I think they think if they come do their plan and they get it in place, something's going to happen to them. It's just that fear of facing it. Not something that usually it's on their list, but not on the top of their list. And it's easy to continue to push down and procrastinate because it's something that's I'm not going anywhere. It's something that's in the future. They don't have to worry about it, so they can continue to procrastinate. And again, the world that we're in right now, I think that's why we've seen more and more individuals be really concerned about that, because suddenly that mortality is now really a little more real than maybe it was before. So.
And I imagine there's some tough decisions that need to be made based on that. I know from what I have seen in the world, you have to figure out who's going to be this trustee or who's going to be the executor, who's going to take care of my kids when I pass, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
That's what I see. The who's going to take care of my kids, I see more often than not stops trusts. or wills are getting established because they get everything else. The finances actually can be fairly straightforward in divvying those up, but it's who's the real question of who's going to take over the kids. That just stops more and more people from actually completing it. Is there a way around that? Can you start something and then just say, well, we'll get everything else signed and leave that blank while you figure it out? Or is that possible? Or
there's always ways to leave things blank, but
Okay.
that makes a little bit of a hole in a plan. So you do want to make sure that the plan is comprehensive, that you sort of tie up all those loose ends. And a way usually to do that is, that's part of my job, is to guide that client through some of those tough decisions and give them different options. But to really listen to what they're saying and give them, again, different avenues that we could pursue that maybe would suit them better.
So you have seen that where there's common stops points, and so you would be able to walk through different strategies of, well, here's in your case, this is the 3 that I possibly see, or here's give some suggestions.
Absolutely, yeah, yep. And usually it's related to, like you said, appointments and or distributions patterns too, with respect to treating kids, quote unquote equally. And what does equal mean? Is it a financial equality, or is there other factors that come into play too? So. We see that. Those are the 2 things I see quite a bit, certainly.
Well, that certainly tells me then that it's something to know as you're watching this video, that you're not alone in dealing with some common stumbling blocks of getting started. So that's a common thing, and that if you are concerned on something, don't be afraid to come in and ask the professional of what are you seeing, or some ideas, and they can probably walk you through those stumbling blocks to get it going, so that way you can actually get one in place.
Yeah.
And so I said get one. So you hear will, trust, estate, slashed or hyphened quite a bit, but there's differences there. Can you talk a little bit about, what is a will versus a trust versus estate at a quite high level, I guess, of, what's the difference? Do you need all of them? Do you need none of them? Are there certain applications of where one applies better than others?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll tell you, that's probably, regardless of the client, even if they already have documents in place or if they have no documents, that's usually the number one question that I get. And people often feel like they're asking a silly question, and it's not. That's very, understanding the documents can be confusing. And so, I want to make sure that, you understand what it is you have or what you're going to be signing. And both the will and the trust are certainly documents that are used to, dispose of your assets upon your passing. A will is something that is what dictates if we are to have a probate estate that actually has to go through probate. Then the will is the document that's going to appoint what we call the personal representative, the person that would administer your estate, and it would also provide for what happens to your assets in there. A trust is sort of a quasi-will, along with a document that can also dictate during your lifetime, which is a good thing. The trust will, again, provide for what happens upon your passing with respect to appointment of a successor trustee to administer your estate and to dispose of your assets. But it also serves to provide for authority during your lifetime. If you're incapacitated, we have the successor trustee automatically able to step in and be able to use those assets for your benefit during your lifetime too.
If someone were to pass away without anything in place, what do they fall back on?
So if we don't have any documents at all, then what happens is we have what we call an intestate estate, and that is really just that your estate is going to pass and be dictated by Michigan statute. And people sometimes, again, have pushed it off, but when you talk to them about what might happen if that is to occur, the distribution pattern may not be what they had intended, because Michigan statute lays out, okay, this is how we're going to distribute your estate then, according to the statute, rather than what you would have potentially chosen yourself.
So it sounds like you would recommend, minimally speaking, get a will in place.
Absolutely, yes. Yep.
Is it safe to say that really not everyone needs a trust, even those that have a fair amount of assets?
Yep, and it's interesting. We've had such a huge jump in the estate tax exemption level. It used to be people's thought were that trusts were only for those that were very wealthy, and that they were used really from an estate tax planning standpoint. And while that's still true, we really don't use any less trusts because of the fact that there's the ease of administration. We have the ability to hopefully avoid going through the probate process. We have that ability to have a successor trustee step in during lifetime on incapacity. Same thing upon death. There is no need to be getting letters of authority from the court or waiting for that. We immediately have somebody that's able to act. So certainly we still do a lot of trusts, even though we aren't doing as much of the estate tax planning for as many individuals. But there are certain circumstances where maybe it doesn't make sense to have a trust, but at least having a will in place, because most people again would want some say in how their assets are going to.
Would another way to say that would be that things don't have to be complicated to need a will or a trust. In that, I hear oftentimes say, well, will and trust are for people that are have lots of complicated, either really high dollar amounts or really complicated situations. That it's better that is it okay to say that everyone should have a will or a estate or something, and it doesn't have to be that complicated? It can be fairly straightforward.
Absolutely, yes, yep. And I actually have clients who may not necessarily have significant wealth or complexity that would otherwise require a trust, but from the standpoint of not wanting to place that administrative burden on their whoever they've appointed or their children, they like, again, the ability to use the trust from just again, administrative perspective, that it's a lot easier and that it's kept private out of probate, out of the public eye. So a lot of those are driving forces, even if we don't have that complexity.
So to put that a different way, is it fair to say that needing a will or an estate or a trust, or again, I'm hyphenating all those and mushing them all together, but it's not necessarily that it has to be complicated or high dollar worth, that at the end of the day, everybody should have a will or a trust or something, that you should be going through and getting this process done?
Absolutely, yes. And again, I have clients that don't have significant amount of wealth or don't have complexity that would otherwise require a trust, and they still want one just from an ease of administration, not wanting to leave a burden on their family members or their children who will be administering it, keep things private, out of the probate court. But again, those documents can be as simple or as complex as you want them to be.
Can you give a good example, like a story, if you will, of an instance where that you dealt after the fact, and you just kind of shake your head and say it would have been that? I can't believe they didn't have something. Just a story to hit it home.
Oh yeah, I've got. How long do we have today?
Right.
Yeah, I mean we deal with those scenarios on a daily basis, and some of the most common ones would be from even just a trust perspective. When you have a trust, we make sure that assets are titled in that trust and not in your name, so that you're not going through the probate court process. I've got one recently that they had done all their planning, but failed to, and actually had taken their property out of their trust at one point in time. And she passed with property in her name individually. So even though she had her trust in place, now we're forced to go through the probate process just because of that one simple thing that kind of got left out. Another big one is beneficiary designations too, that people don't understand, that those are treated separately than your will or your trust. And so making sure that those are consistent with the wishes that are expressed in your will or your trust, because otherwise we can create two totally different distribution patterns where we would have a trust saying we're going to split everything equally between 3 kids, yet the beneficiary designation on their IRA at the time that they did it, they only had 1 child. And so the beneficiary designation actually, by operation of law, prevails, so that IRA is going to go to that 1 child, while the rest of the assets, and again, the intent was to go to all 3, but not having that coordination between those types of accounts too. So, lots and lots of different circumstances where not updating or just not being on top of some of that stuff can cause some big issues.
And that's why you, as a professional, are greatly needed. And you're not always notified of these things. It sounds like clients are moving property without your knowledge, and and it could cause some harm.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Unintended consequences.
Absolutely, and the one with the property, actually I had gone back and looked at my notes, and we had initially put everything in there, and I said to the daughter, I said, why was that property ever moved out of? And she said, well, there was a concern about one of the children, so she decided to just pull it out. And, we never received a phone call, and that could have been as simple as, okay, well, we can deal with that specific child differently, but still keep that property in the trust. So
Just means you have to be a little more flexible, a little more creative.
that's right.
Solve the problem.
Yep.
Let me ask you this. I had read before that there's over 100 different types of trusts. Is that true? Are there that many variations out there?
There are a lot of variations. I had not heard that before, but I would guess that yes. I will take you for your word.
All right.
Yes, there are tons of different trusts, and it seems there are new ones every time there's a new tax law or some new guidance from the IRS. There's the estate planners are behind the scenes trying to figure out how to take advantage of that and create some
Find
new.
loopholes?
I wasn't going to use that word, but yes.
Does that just basically just add another name out there? This type of trust now. This paragraph has changed, therefore we're going to change the name of the trust.
It is. It really is. How the trust is set up. What's the goal of the trust? What's the purpose of the trust? That's usually why we have so many different types of trust. If we've got charities involved, if we've got trusts that we need assets to be excluded from the estate. We're looking at irrevocable trusts. Obviously, the most common is always going to be the revocable trust that everybody is really used to, but there are certainly a lot of variations which can be used depending on each client's circumstances.
And do you have kind of what are the go-to trusts that you use for planning then? If there's just this huge smorgasbord, this selection of trusts out there, what seems to be common?
It really sounds, when you say that there's so many, it sounds really, complicated. For most people, you're really looking at what we call the grantor revocable trust, which is that I set up my own trust. I have the ability during my lifetime to amend it, revoke it, terminate it, change it. And it's only upon my death that it becomes irrevocable where nobody can change it. Those are used, irrevocable trusts are used sometimes for, again, usually trying to shield assets from an estate, so we're putting those away in an irrevocable trust. We also use, I can rattle off acronyms all day long, but I would say, the most common are those, and then we start getting into the weeds with respect to other types of trusts that could be used in certain circumstances.
Well, thank you for joining us here today. We are going to dive into all those different types of trusts. We're going to go into specific on the irrevocable trust as well as the revocable, which is probably the most common, some wills, some other ones on some future videos here, so keep watching on those. But for right now, please know and please take away that one of the most common things that we see is that people just don't have a will or a trust. And there's common stumbling blocks, and they just don't go anywhere with it. And so the takeaway here is it doesn't have to be complicated. It doesn't have to be significant. Just go in and use this opportunity right now to reevaluate what you have. Know that if you feel like, well, I can't do it just because of X, and whatever X is, that it's okay that you're not the only one that's feeling that, and to come in and talk to a professional. So thank you for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you here as we dive into some of these going down the road.